The European Union's decision to impose tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, EVs, has triggered a trade war that could devastate Europe's economy. France is buried in 3.2 trillion euros of debt, while Italy faces a 100 billion euro deficit. China's retaliation is now targeting their lifeline luxury exports, with 11 billion euros in luxury goods and 61.5 million bottles of French cognac sold to China at risk. Europe's economies are nearing the brink of financial meltdown if Beijing retaliatory measures expand. France is the biggest producer of brandy, and wine could also be targeted in those Mediterranean nations, particularly France, Italy, and Spain. Brandy is the biggest producer of alcohol, and wine could also be targeted in those Mediterranean nations, particularly France, Italy, and Spain. The EU has implemented additional tariffs of up to 38% on Chinese EVs on top of the existing 10% tariff on vehicles. This measure has prompted swift retaliation from Beijing. China's Commerce Ministry spokesperson He Dong stated that China reserves the right to file complaints to the World Trade Organization and called on the EU to correct its wrong practices. Both France and Italy are grappling with significant economic challenges. France's fiscal crisis has reached alarming proportions, with its total debt ballooning to a staggering 3.2 trillion euros, surpassing its entire economic output. The country's debt-to-GDP ratio now stands at an alarming 112%, raising serious concerns about fiscal sustainability and potential default. The trade deficit, currently exceeding 6 billion euros each month, has contributed significantly to this dire situation. Italy, under the leadership of Giorgia Meloni, is struggling with a persistent gap between expenditures and revenues amounting to approximately 100 billion euros. The country's efforts to enhance trade revenues are hampered by structural inefficiencies and a lack of competitiveness issues that could be further exacerbated by the looming trade war. Italy's debt-to-GDP ratio stands at a staggering 138%, the second highest in Europe according to Eurostat's Sandro GOI. The country's reliance on tourism, which constitutes 10% of its GDP, makes it particularly vulnerable to global economic shifts and potential retaliatory measures from China. The impact on the European luxury goods sector, a crucial component of both the French and Italian economies, could be severe. The luxury goods sector, including leather bags, perfume, jewelry, shoes, suits, and apparel, is at risk of retaliatory measures from China. A third of the EU's $1 billion worth of leather and plastic handbags exported to China last year originated in France, highlighting the country's vulnerability to potential Chinese retaliation. China's rationale for targeting luxury goods is that multifaceted luxury products are non-essential to Chinese productivity and any price increases would have a limited impact on the broader Chinese population. The wealthiest 2% of customers typically account for about 40% of luxury sales. Targeting this sector aligns with internal European dynamics, given France's vocal support for EU tariffs and its significant luxury goods exports to China. However, there are some products that China might avoid retaliation because they actually need those items. For example, Airbus, one of the two main suppliers globally, is said to be in negotiations for about 100 new wide-body aircraft from China. They are not about to put a tax or tariff on items they are about to buy or import into China. China has been gradually reducing tariffs since joining the World Trade Organization in 2001. Handbags from the EU are subject to only a 6% tariff when imported into China. However, Beijing has other tools at its disposal, such as the potential expansion of its consumption tax. China currently levies a consumption tax on 15 categories of goods, with 6 falling into the luxury category. The implications for luxury companies like LVMH and Kering are significant, as the country accounts for a substantial portion of their Asian market, representing about a third of global revenue for each company. Passing on increased costs to Chinese consumers would be challenging, especially given the current economic slowdown in China. Bank of America analysts predict that most luxury companies will have to choose to raise prices significantly. The broader economic context of this trade dispute is crucial to understanding its potential impact. Both France and Italy are already facing severe economic challenges, with France's projected deficit for this year expected to exceed 6% of GDP, outpacing even the United States. The European Union, EU, is facing a complex situation due to rising inflation and energy costs, which threaten to worsen the already fragile economic landscape. This has led to China considering increasing tariffs on imports of EU cars with large engines, primarily affecting German manufacturers. A leading Chinese auto industry expert has called for raising the tariff on imported vehicles with larger engines to reduce carbon emissions, which would hit high-end German exports from Mercedes and BMW. Research firm Sanford C. Bernstein noted that the impact on German makers would be muted by the fact that most of their cars sold in China are made locally. However, given that the EU exports €18 billion year worth of vehicle to China annually, any retaliatory measures could be very painful for European manufacturers. Volkswagen expressed concern about the EU's decision, stating that the negative effects of this decision outweigh any potential benefits for the European and especially the German automotive industry. The company warned that the EU tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles could escalate trade conflicts and promote an ongoing trend toward protectionism, nationalism, and isolationism. Other European sectors at risk of Chinese retaliation include agricultural products such as wine from France, Italy, and Spain, pork from Spain, and dairy products from Denmark. Spain is particularly vulnerable to potential duties on pork as China is its second largest market for pork exports. Spain's Minister for Economy and Trade Carlos Queiroz said the EU needs to keep negotiating with China to avoid an escalation of these protectionist measures. The automotive sector faces a potential 25% tax on large-engine European cars, which could significantly impact German manufacturers. This move would align with China's stated goal of reducing carbon emissions but also serve as a strategic response to the EU's EV tariffs. The long-term consequences of this trade dispute for European industries and global trade relations are yet to be fully understood. In 1999, the European Union had a brilliant idea to create their own global navigation satellite system, Galileo, which would provide an independent high-precision positioning system, reducing their reliance on the US and Russian systems. The project was officially agreed upon on May 26, 2003, by the European Union and the European Space Agency. The system was intended primarily for civilian use, unlike the more military-focused systems of the US, Russia, and China. Creating a satellite navigation system from scratch requires enormous resources both in terms of funding and technical expertise. The EU turned to none other than the United States, which has a history of negotiating with China to avoid escalating the situation and potentially impacting global trade systems.